Okay, I guess it's 10:30, so this is the appropriate moment to get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Paul, and I'm going to talk about my favorite topic, the golden age of design in a tech conference. So I'm very happy that there are a few of you actually interested in this topic in this crowd. When I started, when I finished my studies, it's about 15 years ago, I went out of design school. There was no golden age of design. I still remember this difficult moment of going out from design school, which at that time, it was like an oasis of creativity and interesting projects, and everything seemed so promising. And the transition then to the desert of job applications. There were no jobs for industrial designers in 2003. And most of my classmates, they actually chose different professions than design, whereas I finally managed to achieve a job proposition in an industrial design company almost for free. So I worked almost for free to start with, because that was all I could get, and I would embrace it proudly. And now 15 years passed, and everything is completely different. Designers are working within healthcare and public sector. They're working with business to consumers and business to business solutions as well. They're working in banks. They're working with mobility, even city planning and politics. You find designers now. So something happened during those 15 years. Actually, nowadays, if you're a decent designer at design school, people will come and headhunt you 2 or 3 years before you're done. So something really happened during those 15 years, which I would say, because I think that most of you are techies probably. Are there any designers in the crowd? There are a few designers in the crowd. That's cool. So technologists have been in this kind of golden age for quite some time, I think. And if it's true, and I really do believe that technologists and designers have this in common, that we're going to play an important role in shaping what the future is going to look like. And if that is true, I think it's a really, really good investment that designers and technologists really learn how to collaborate and understand each other in the best possible way. So that's what I'm going to try to do here. And by the way, it's like I think my biggest criticism to many developers or tech environments is that they're very often quite they're quite narrow and diving really deep into niche topics. Whereas I think that is really, really good sometimes to zoom out and try to see the bigger picture. So it's a compliment to you guys, because I think this is a good zoom out opportunity to look at this golden age of design. So that's what I'm going to talk about here. This is the takeaway right away. I'm going to talk about how design now has become the new innovation superfuel, that I will call it. And I'm going to explain a little bit the evolution of design seen from my perspective. I'm going to talk also about how I believe that we can design the future, a good approach for designing the future. And the reason why I doodled the agenda like this is that I really like to promote the idea of being visual and doodling and making little illustrations. So at the end, if we get time, we're going to have a little quiz. And the prize for that quiz is going to be a little doodling starter kit. So we're going to do a Kahoot with, I hope you all have smartphones, and it's possible to connect to the Wi-Fi here. So, and there are going to be little cues in the presentation for what that quiz is going to be about, so stay sharp. So to start, design is the new innovation superfuel. It's something that I say, but I would like to try to prove it a little bit. One of the big milestones, I think, of modern design history was this that happened in 2007 when the iPhone was released. And I think Apple has done has had a major impact on the impression of the importance of design. Some people say that the smartphone is the most impactful innovation through the history of mankind, because it has such an enormous impact on the behavior of human beings. And interestingly enough, even though this is a tech company and there's a lot of tech involved, one of the major reasons for its success is Apple's focus on user experience. Because there are many competitors that are technologically superior to this, but the user experience has been a unique gift from Apple to the world in a way. So it's been a big contributor to what has happened. So a lot of people have felt this new impact of the design focus through the years, but we've been talking about it, but we haven't been able to put numbers to it. Until this woman came along. Her name is Leah Bewley. She worked at Forrester at the time, and she did this first really big research, talking with a lot of major companies around the world to find out how are they working with design and how it is related to the rate of success. So I was actually watching her presentation live, and it was the first of its sort, and it's been followed by many later doing design research. And basically what she's saying is that you can categorize all companies in 3 different categories. One that she calls outdated when it comes to how they're working with design, one that is progressing, and one that is modern. And she's not a designer herself, so it's not as arrogant as if a designer would say the same thing. But the companies that are working in a modern way have a higher chance of succeeding with their innovation work. And what characterizes them is that they're using designers to work on visions and strategies within the company. They're using designers to work in a holistic way, so all the touch points that they have to their market is being designed. And also they have designers quite high up in their organization. Like on an executive level, they have designers that can actually affect the strategy and the direction of the company. So this was the first proof of the effect of using designers in the right way. There's a very famous design company called Frog, and they were actually one of the first series of Apple products were designed by Frog. So they had a big impact. They're someone important in the design world, and they have been classifying the kinds of impacts that designers have on companies dealing with innovation. So they're classifying it like this: working in the right way, or in the optimal way with design, will increase your speed to the market, it will improve your market reach, and it will also improve the engagement and loyalty of your clients over time. Also, on a company level, it will actually improve the internal capability development of the company as well. So it's good for the culture, and it's good to improve a general innovation mindset and the capability of thinking in new ways, like not getting stuck in the past. And even in the longer term, working in a good way with designers will improve your chance of succeeding with visionary transformations. That's pretty ambitious. It's pretty ambitious, and it's a bold thing to say. And if this is true, then why wouldn't you work with designers? This is one of the reasons of why design has now entered this golden age. So another doodle, this is again a proof, I think. It's evidencing that these things are happening. These major companies, tech companies and management consultancy companies, have actually started buying or acquiring the biggest and most important design environments, because it's very hard to just hire designers, because designers thrive among other designers. So what do? They actually go ahead and buy design companies. There aren't all that many independent design companies left, because they have been purchased by large companies that need to feed their own ability to innovate. So it's very interesting. Also to look at the top business schools that now have all started teaching design thinking. So they have all acknowledged that they need to have design on the agenda for their students to succeed with business later on in their careers. So everyone now needs to have a certain level of design competency. So all of these things actually started happening, quite a contrast from where I found myself in 2003, when nobody knew or understood why do they really need design. So golden age, and that's great. So what really happened with design? I think design is a difficult word because it has a heritage. You know, where design came from, I think most people, and maybe still today, when they just hear the word design, they might associate it to beautiful things, like a piece of furniture. This is well designed, people say. And it's true, because this is where design came from, right? So it's not a wrong association. It's just that it's very limiting. So we need to kind of open up our mind and understand how design has evolved through these last 15 years. So I think that a long time ago, if we're looking at the quick version of the evolution of design, a long time ago, design was mainly about form and craft. Some functionality perhaps, but you would expect from a designer to take the responsibility for something to look appealing and desirable, and that was the main part of the job. Little by little, because of the designer's ability to be visual and to approach problems from the perspective of the user that is going to experience these products, designers started approaching more complex kind of challenges. Challenges that required designers to do insight on people, their tasks and their jobs and their desires and behaviors and patterns, to do insight on technology and also business goals. And this is what is populistically called design thinking. So you do all this insight and then you solve the problems that you find along the way to match the needs that you have mapped. So it's more complex problems, and I think that once design thinking was established in the early 90s by a company called IDEO in collaboration with Stanford University, that was a great success. So designers started becoming good at navigating through complexity, like large amounts of insight, and then turning that insight, connecting the dots and turning it into smart solutions to those problems. Because of that, designers now are also invited to this table that is about real transformation and really big picture problems, working more systemically, working with really complex problems and things that are related to not only problem solving, but transformation. And this is very interesting because the way the world is going, we need more transformation power, not only design thinking and incremental improvements, but to think completely differently. So I'm going to get back to that for a little moment. I think it's important to point out that when you talk about evolutions, normally you move from something primitive, right? And then you get to something that is super advanced and this is the shit. But that's not really the case here, because in this evolution, it's true that designers are still working with form and craft. We're still working with problem solving, and we're still working with this. So what we usually say is that we take this evolution of design and we turn it 90 degrees, and we say that you need to work on all these levels to have the biggest impact of your design efforts as you can possibly have. So this is what we're trying to promote to the clients that we're working with and the challenges that we have. So first, we still work with form and craft. An example of this is a project we did a few years ago. We designed a whiskey glass. And it was kind of smart because you can take the stone into the freezer, so the stone is cold, so that you can pour your whiskey and it would cool down the whiskey without diluting the whiskey with the ice cubes that maybe were next to the fish in the freezer, and then the whiskey is ruined. So it was kind of clever, but the main idea with this is that it needs to be aesthetically appealing and beautiful, right? So it's form and craft. So the next level in the pyramid is about problem solving. So an example of that is, for example, this user interface that we did for Semrad, part of the Kongsberg group. This is sonar that uses echo sound waves to find things, objects in the sea, and then the users that are professional, they need to interact with this. So it definitely has a lot of problem solving. You need to understand the users, the context that they're in. We can't use very bright colors because we're going to ruin their night vision. We also need to use conventions that they have to operate this kind of equipment, because they're operating a lot of different equipment as well. And we need to accommodate for the task flow that they have so that they can work efficiently. But it also has a quite big amount of craft, form and craft in it still. Because today, when there's so much global competition, you really need to be clear with your brand. What kind of quality do you represent as a company? And there's a lot of visuality that can support the functionality and that will help reinforce your brand as well. And thanks to Steve Jobs in 2007, people are now expecting a higher standard of user experiences, even in business to business, than they did maybe before that time. So the last part of the pyramid is the strategic transformation, and some people would say that you can do that by design thinking, and some people are using service designers to work on innovation, whereas what we're seeing now is that strategic transformation sometimes is actually the opposite of design thinking, because design thinking is very democratic. It's like you invite a whole bunch of people in the process and you do insight, and you use that insight to solve problems. Whereas when you use transformations, you go through transformations, you really need some visionaries that dare to think new. So I have an example of this, a case with a company called LoadSmart that I'm going to talk about. So this is a group of entrepreneurs that are risk-taking, and they needed designers to help them out to succeed. They were primarily a tech company to start with. So it's all based on this idea. You have shippers and you have carriers. Those that need to send the apples from point A to B, and those that have the trucks. And in between them, you have something called brokers. They are the ones that will match the capacity of the trucks with those that have the need to send the goods. Now, this used to be managed by a broker who would spend approximately 5 hours to make this transaction. Because you have to match, you have to call, you have to negotiate and find the right price, and then you have to call back, and then maybe you can get it confirmed, maybe not, and so forth. And these guys, which are the entrepreneurs, they said that, look, this broker business is very outdated. We have a lot of data now that we can do to make this a much more efficient system. If Uber can do it, we can do it. And this guy here, he's married to a woman who works in Uber, so she told him a few secrets about how they succeeded. So I think he got some ideas from that. So they said, look, we're a tech company, we can do technology-driven innovation, but we also would like to bring in design-driven innovation to succeed with this transformation that we want to represent. So in this project, we facilitated very strategic kind of workshops where we brought some new insights and ideas to the table, and we were talking about the stakeholders, we were talking about the goals, what kind of value propositions would be most important for them to actually offer. And we would collaborate in a platform that we use more and more often. This is a real-time board where you can collect all the data that you're working with in a workshop. We could map out stakeholder maps like this, and make big overviews, work on stakeholder journey overviews like this that would make you understand the relationship between the stakeholders and how that is developing through the value chain of their offering. And we would make this big canvases that you can, it's like a whiteboard that you can zoom in and out of and collaborate across locations. So it's a really good way to be visual and accommodate for a rather complex design process. So we ended up making a lot of wireframes for what this could look like, and we ended up with a solution that looked something like this. So instead of using a broker, if you needed to ship something, you would get an instant price. And this platform actually wouldn't know who would drive your cargo at the moment that they would give the instant price, but they would use data algorithms to get a guesstimate that would be close enough to be able to commit to this. So they would just remove the broker altogether and replace it with data algorithms. So this was for the shippers. This was also a kind of touch point for even the truck drivers that would get more predictability in their work, and they would be able to kind of even get support with the kind of route that they were taking, preparing themselves for the interactions when they would pick up the cargo and deliver the cargo and so forth. And all in all, this became an ecosystem of digital interfaces that would accommodate for the needs of all the stakeholders in the value chain of this cargo. So that was the functionality part of it, and the brand and communication part of it was important as well, because they needed to come across as a credible, reliable company. And being a startup in such a huge business as the trucking business is not an easy deal. So the brand needed to be consistent through the functionality and also the communication. And this project was a great success. We actually were able to measure effects. They had, in their second year of operation, they had more than 1 million quotes instant pricing quotes that were delivered each year. And it's a pretty big number, even for the US. The speed of making a deal from the 5 hours that the broker used turned into only 18 minutes, average per shipment. So it's not an incremental improvement. It's a revolution for the ones doing business. And there's quite a lot of money in this too. And also there was 93% less wait for the carriers to receive the payment, which is of course a big deal. There's one effect though that is, I think, more interesting than all the others, which is about sustainability. Because since this is based on data, you were able to utilize some of those trucks that would return home that would otherwise go empty, the so-called empty miles. And what they measured was that they were able to utilize 8% of those 19 billion needless miles in US each year. And that is quite interesting because, and I just tried to figure out and get my head around this, like, what is 8% of 19 billion needless miles? How much is that? What is it? It represents 700,000 tons of carbon dioxide, which is equivalent to more than 6,000 years of hot shower. I converted to hot shower because I like hot shower, and to be sustainable, you shouldn't take so many hot showers. But then I realized that if we can do design work and save 6,000 years of hot showers, then I can shower with a good consciousness. So I think that was cool. And I have this slide that I apologize, it looks a little bit bragging, but this founder in the middle there, he said that we couldn't do this without eggs. And I really appreciate that a tech company like this, delivering a service in a business-to-business market, really admits that a big part of the success was because they worked in a good way with designers. So how is it then that designers have become so important in this world, the way the world is evolving at the moment? And so I'm trying to summarize this in 3 main arguments that I would have. And I would say one thing that is happening to the world right now, which is also a reason why technologists are in the middle of the juice, right, is that we have this, and you could call it the perfect technology storm, because there are so many different technologies that are maturing at the same time. It's a little bit overwhelming, actually. And many companies are almost drowning in opportunities. Like, you almost get paralyzed because there are so many opportunities you don't even know where to start. And things are changing really fast. And I think that the designers respond to this development is that we are people ambassadors. People don't change as fast as these technologies. And if we're able to understand people and make sure that whatever we produce actually has value to people, it's a good guide, I think, through making sense of this perfect technology storm. We have focus on value propositions, and it's a good focus. The second thing that is happening is that the world is becoming more complex, and also things are speeding up. Things are changing much faster than before. And in my opinion, I find that the work that designers do and contribute with is very relevant here, because we're good at visualizing and take something that is complex and make it easier to grasp, to facilitate a process in which we can have dot connection that will make more sense of complexity. And that is something that I find that a lot of our clients are really appreciating when we're succeeding doing that. Thirdly, I say that this is not only about technology, right? The market expectation is changing a lot as well. And to meet those expectations, you need to be more future-oriented. So I would say that designers have gotten into this position of being quite good at crafting futures, building visions that people can believe in such a way that it's easier to align your organization in that direction. And that is the introduction to the third section of this presentation. Because how do you go about that, designing the future? So there are many ways of looking at this. I would say that one way of looking at one way of looking at the changes that are happening is to categorize. You say that there are new expectations, there are new business models, there's new technology, and there are new value chains, and all of these changes are happening whether you like it or not. So if you're in a company that is going to exist in the future, you have to figure out what position will your company have in the future. You actually have to define your future position. Most companies can't go ahead like they do right now, because then they're going to end up in the graveyard of outdated companies that didn't manage this transition. And I realize this is a bit of a cliche, and a lot of people are using this as a scenario, like a scary scenario, you know, to sell their services and say that, look, you need me because otherwise you're going to end up here. But there's something to it. Everyone needs to change. But how you change and what you use to change, that's the question. There's a pitfall. There's a big pitfall. And I like to present this guy, Ira Glass. Has anyone heard about him? He's a really funny guy. He's a radio host, but every once in a while he has some really strong points. And he had one strong point when he defined something that is called the Modern Jackass. And I think the Modern Jackass is one of those major pitfalls when designing the future, or approaching the future. So a modern jackass, according to Ira Glass, is a person that talks expertly about something that he or she actually knows nothing about. Because the thing is that, what he says is that having no information is pure, but almost nobody has no information anymore, right? Because in this information society, there's so easy access to information about everything. Everyone has watched a TEDx or a YouTube about some topic, and then you use that knowledge. What it says, you use that tiny pigment of knowledge to paint a vast canvas of the entire world. And that is the modern jackass right there. That's his behavior pattern. And it's interesting because if you're in a dinner party, and there's a modern jackass in that dinner party, and most probably there is because there are quite few of them. I'm one myself, by the way. Then, you know, that's nice because it's a good story, and, you know, you can start playing with existential ideas about the future and so forth. But in a business setting, if there's a modern jackass in the business setting, it can be dangerous and really expensive. Because if you take a tiny pigment of information that person saw in a TEDx talk, and then you base your entire future vision on that tiny pigment of information, it's quite likely that you would go in the wrong direction, right? So that's the point, that's the pitfall, is that when you're working with it, you better work in a structured way. You better use future insights in a way that is organized. And I believe that if you do that, and you combine it with design methodology, you can have a good creative process based on insights and creativity, and then a way of visualizing that future with something that is actually a systematic process. I'm sure there are more pitfalls as well, but that is certainly one that I've seen quite a few examples of. So how do you work with future insights in an organized way? Well, there is something that is called trend studying, and we are using an authority on future trends that is called Copenhagen Institute for Futures Studies. I don't know if any of you are familiar with them, but they have like PhDs on trend studies, and they've made this big map of trends, and they have defined something called megatrends. And megatrends work like this. First, you study all of the microtrends that you find in the world, and an example of a microtrend is a Fitbit. Counts your steps, right? In a few years, it might not exist anymore, but the phenomena Fitbit, it has to do with a larger trend, you can call a subtrend, that is called do-it-yourself health. So that is a trend that is going to last for a longer period of time. And this is a so-called subtrend. And then the groups of subtrends again will turn into what they call a megatrend. A megatrend is something that has lasted for 10 years and will continue lasting for 10 years, at least. So it's not guesswork. There will be an increased focus on health for at least 10 more years. And we can use that information to innovate for the future. And that's the point of the theory of these megatrends. So you can't hide. You can't hide from these megatrends. They are going to happen, yes or yes. So there are 13 of these megatrends, and I'm going to show you a very, very quick example of a couple of them without going into the depth. And these are available, by the way. It's Copenhagen Institute of Future Studies that have made them. And they also have, below these trends, we have hundreds of sub-trends that we can use to fuel these creative processes. So, notice that technological advances is only one of those 13 megatrends. Tech advances is one. I talked about the perfect technology storm. Not going to talk so much about. I think all of these are sub-trends. All of these are actually happening right now. Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, robotics, AR, VR, blockchain, and 3D printing, all of these are actually happening, and we have to figure out how to use them. But since many of you are techies, I'm going to talk so much about these. What is interesting, though, is that, yes, they're going to happen, but we don't know exactly what the consequence of these technologies are going to be. So you have some uncertainties within these trends. For example, this dude, Elon Musk, he is very worried about artificial intelligence being the cause of World War III. We don't really know that. There's a big uncertainty. Another uncertainty is what is going to happen to augmented reality. If you haven't seen this YouTube video, I encourage you to see it. I think it's very cool, and it's a very good example of where technologists and designers should really cooperate. So this is what can happen to our world if augmented reality goes crazy, and we all have little lenses that gives us a layer of extra information over everything that exists in the world. You get hyper reality, you get totally saturated by information, and it's a headache. This video is 5 minutes long, and every time I see it, I have a headache when it's over. So these are technology trends that represent design and tech challenges for us. Another example of a megatrend is this focus on health that I talked about. And it's interesting here that even the concept of health has changed through time. For example, in 1955, healthy meant that you're not sick. In 1985, it meant that you're in good shape. And nowadays, it means maximizing your fitness potential. You're not quite healthy unless you have maximized your fitness potential. This means something for the kinds of products and services and value propositions that we're going to produce out there. We can expect this to just become more extreme in the years to come. And people are really worried about death and getting old and that, and they're willing to spend their money on it. So because of this, something also happened to the demographic structure of our societies. Like, for example, in 1950, you were a child until you were a youth, then became a parent, and then when you were done being a parent, you were already elderly. You were kind of dismissed from society. Whereas now, it's far more positive for people like me, now past my 40s, and I have this phase to look forward to. Free too. My kids are getting grown up, and I still feel like I have a lot of life left to live. And this is interesting because it represents new markets. So you have free one and free two, and you have free always, more and more people that don't get children at all. You have something, there are some interesting demographic groups. There's a one that they call DINK. You know what a DINK is? Double income, no kids. A wonderful group to sell services to because they have double income and no kids. So this is interesting to take into consideration, of course, when you're developing future scenarios. So here you have free to healthy and wealthy. Sell products to them. They're a good market. People are willing then to spend more money on health. Private health-related services are going to become more common in the years to come. Also, do-it-yourself health products, going to be more and more of those. Do-it-yourself, even DNA testing, there's going to be more and more of those. Even these kind of things that maybe originally were built to help people that had some kind of injury or some kind of defect, which will also now be developed for people with no injury just to improve their capabilities. The general capabilities is going to happen more and more. So this focus on health is an example of a trend that does not have to do with technology. So if you only focus on technology and not these other trends, you're missing out. Another example is this, immaterialization. One of the trends that we're talking about there is that there are a lot of products and services available out there for different levels of this Maslow's pyramid that I'm sure you're all familiar with. Well, the tendency is that we're moving towards the top. The trend goes towards the top. The more products and services that will help you realize your potential is going to be the tendency in the years moving forward. One example that I find very funny is that you have services like this that look kind of silly. Instead of buying a liter of milk in the store, instead you can lease a cow, and you get the story of the cow that has produced the milk for you. It's kind of silly, but it says something about people's need to understand stories better than just getting the product. So this value ladder that we're talking about, are you selling a commodity? Are you selling goods? Are you selling a service or even an experience? Like the coffee grain, the coffee cup, the restaurant, or maybe a barista course, because people want the experiences. They want it to be meaningful now. And it's funny when you look at the trends for these things that are the authentic things. Back to the hyper-reality. If we have an existence with this hyper-reality, with everything is just saturated with impacts all the time, there's actually going to be an increased market for these things that are the scarce goods of the future. So there are 13 of these megatrends, and they were just some examples, and it's possible to use them in this way. For example, so if you're going to innovate, what you can do is to build a future foundation. You base it on a theme. Let's say you're working in a bank and you want to make a new service, and you say, banking for children, the future of banking for children. Then you can make that, so that would be your theme. Then you can pick the trends that are particularly interesting for the future of banking for children, and you combine it with some insights, some people insight for the current day. And then you can start building scenarios. You have one big scenario, which is the most probable scenario. You have to decide also how far into the future you want to think. But there are certain things you can be almost certain of. But then there's a range of things that has an uncertainty to it. And from those, you can build more speculative future scenarios. So there's not one future that you design for, but several futures. And based on that future scenario, you can start making the value propositions. The future visions or value propositions and all the concepts that you want to take your organization in that direction and be prepared for that kind of future scenario. So that is an approach to do it. So that is what I mean with future thinking. You take design thinking, people, technology, and business goals, and you add the dimension of the future, and voila, you have future thinking. Looks very simple when you put it like that. Does it make sense? Good. So to sum it up, design is innovation superfuel. The evolution of design, I've been taking you through that. And also I talked a little bit about designing the future. And I think the main message to technologists, when I talk to technologists, is that if you believe in what I've been saying here, then I think that the next time you have an interesting development or innovation kind of project, invite designers to the party. It might pay off. That's my main message.